Manhwa begins with a guy. He tells our protagonist not to hide, and reassures her she can stop things if she wants. She worries about being seen by others. He insists she only look at him, saying he knows she wants him too. She denies it at first. But deep down, she feels he's uncovering her true desires. She struggles with these feelings, wondering if she wants to resist him or not. Eventually, they come together intimately. He tells her she's beautiful and expresses hope for freedom. A month ago, he appeared unexpectedly. Walking into the house, he admires its interior. He asks the butler about Marquess Maya, who is currently absent. A lady appears and questions his purpose. He explains he's looking for his father, Theno Maya. There's a stir among onlookers, as they realize he's the Marquess's son. Whispers spread about his father's identity. She expresses doubt about the Marquess having children with his late wife. He offers proof and mentions the Marquess's naive nature in love. He questions if she could be a relative. She denies it and he presses for an explanation. She introduces herself as Lavielle Lewin. He asks when the Marquess will return, and she estimates it'll be in the evening. He decides to wait for him. Lavielle instructs Maisie to prepare tea for their guest, who introduces himself as Lucien Maya. Maisie remarks that he looks nothing like the Lord Maya. Lord Maya comes back and Lucien shows him a keepsake from his mother, Genevieve. Lord Maya recognizes it as something he gave her. He silently regrets giving it to her, intending her to sell it for a better life, not for her son to come looking for him. He asks Lucien if he's interested in knowing about his father. Lucien says yes. Lord Maya wonders why Lucien has different hair from his mother, who was blonde, while Lucien has ashy brown hair. If only my mother were still alive, we could have been together, Lucien says. Lord Maya asks him to clarify. Lucien reassures him it's just a joke. He explains his mother never wanted to burden Lord Maya, whether in life or death, but raising him alone was her choice. Lucien decided to follow his father's footsteps and study medicine. He expresses a desire to work at Lord Maya's clinic now that he's grown up. He teases Lord Maya about it being his turn to take care of him. Lord Maya hesitates, saying it's not that simple to suddenly work together. Lucien remarks on the awkwardness of being an illegitimate child, but acknowledges his father's busy schedule. Lord Maya suggests they keep their relationship discreet, maybe as distant relatives. Lucien agrees to keep quiet around the servants. He wonders about the young woman, Lavielle. His father dismisses her as a pitiful nobleman's daughter, who lost her family, and has nowhere else to go. He tells his son not to pay attention to her. Later, his father bids him good night and he leaves. He ponders Lavielle's situation. She looks young, but seems older than 20. He questions why a grown woman would be with a widower like his father. He remembers their conversation and decides he needs to talk to her. Meanwhile, in Lavielle's room, she thinks about him, calling him a possible conman after Theno's fortune. She senses he's not the first to have such intentions. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door. She realizes it's him. Every night, Maya visits her. He comments on her waiting for him, explaining he was delayed. As he enters, she thinks about the young man who claims to be his son. He dismisses the topic and turns his attention to Lavielle, complimenting her beauty in the darkness. Abruptly, he tears her dress and demands to know where her desire is. Lavielle protests, saying she's not in the mood. Despite her pleas, he forces himself on her and criticizes her lack of response. He hits her and questions the purpose of her beauty if she can't satisfy him. Distraught, Lavielle cries out for help, begging someone to save her. Lucien hears her screams through the peephole and knocks on the door, prompting Maya to ask who's there. Lavielle remembers the Lewin family manor, always bright with sunlight. She recalls her beautiful, loving mother and her strict but admirable father. Her life was filled with happiness and free of pain until misfortune struck. Scandals of fraud and treason ruined the Lewin family overnight. Her parents were executed, and their fortune was stolen by once trusted relatives. Lavielle was left with only the clothes on her back and nowhere to go. The Marquess found her and offered his hand. He apologized for what happened to her parents, and said a young lady like her shouldn't face life's harsh realities alone. He introduced himself as a respected and renowned doctor with a gentle smile, and offered to help her, asking if he could be her guardian. Believing he was her savior, Lavielle thanked him for his help. But to himself, the Marquess thought, "Lavielle Lewin, you fool." The flashback ends. Lavielle wakes up to find Maisie in her room. She greets Maisie, who comments on how sunny it is and suggests they go for a stroll. Lavielle likes the idea and asks if she can go outside. Maisie apologizes, explaining that the Marquess won't let her leave the estate. Lavielle already knew this. Before she entered the manor, she thought the Marquess was a good man, but he wasn't what he seemed. When the Marquess gets home, he introduces his son Lucien to Lavielle. Lucien stretches out his hand for a shake, but Lavielle turns away. She recalls the knock on her door the previous night. The Marquess had angrily shouted not to be disturbed, but when he opened the door, the hall was empty. He was upset that his plans were interrupted. Lavielle wonders what would have happened if Lucien had found out what was going on in the room. They are having breakfast, and Lucien comments on how good the food is. His father is pleased, and then Lucien asks if there are cats in the area. His father is surprised by the question. Lucien explains that he couldn't sleep the previous night because he heard the howling of cats trying to mate, describing it as sounding like an old tomcat. His father suddenly chokes on his food, and Lavielle freezes, realizing Lucien heard them the previous night. The Marquess excuses himself and tells Lavielle to show Lucien around later, but Lucien declines, saying he can find his own way. Lavielle stares at him, wondering why this man is here. Later that evening, Lavielle struggles to concentrate on her reading, distracted by thoughts of the con man in the house. She notes that he doesn't look like the Marquess. Suddenly, someone greets her from behind. It's Lucien, who asks why she's still up and if she likes going for strolls. She hurriedly says yes. He requests to join her, but she feels intimidated. Lucien reminds her that they are family now, and will be living under the same roof. He asks her not to act so guarded around him. They are walking, and Lucien comments on the pleasant breeze. He asks if she's usually reserved and quiet, then surprises her by asking if she's supposed to marry his father. Lavielle is taken aback by the question. Lucien quickly apologizes for being invasive and asks if she's afraid of him. Feeling offended, she says she's going back home. He hurriedly stops her, asking her to stay a bit longer, explaining that it's his first proper day there and everything is still new to him. She agrees to stay, but only for a while. Lucien asks if she knows why he searched for his father. She says she doesn't. He explains that it was because of his mother's will, though he doesn't think it matters anymore. She apologizes for his loss, but he says it's okay, and that he has come to terms with it, mentioning that some people find peace in death. Lavielle reflects on this, thinking about her own suffering at Theno's hands every night. Lucien then asks if she ever gets tired of everything. Shocked by the question, she doesn't respond. He suggests that if she's tired of it, she should run away with him. She's shocked by his suggestion. "What did you say?" she asks. He explains that he only said it to lighten the mood, but she gets angry and tells him it wasn't funny. He apologizes, but she says she's had enough and heads to bed. He tells her, "Good night, my lady," and she replies the same. He reminds her that he has a name, but she still says good night. Then he grabs her arm and insists she say his name. Startled, she hits him. He quickly apologizes and promises to stop. Finally, he wishes her good night again, and she responds, "Good night, Lucien Meyer." Later that night, Maya, Lavielle, and a specialist are together. Maya asks the specialist if he has a diagnosis. The specialist says he's almost there and examines Lavielle, asking if she feels any pain. She says she does. He adjusts and asks again, and she says it's uncomfortable. She wonders why she must go through so much pain. The specialist asks her to tense her pelvic muscles, and she winces. He then tells Maya that she has atrophic vaginitis. Maya asks if this means she won't be able to have children. The specialist says she can bear children, but her case is severe and unlike anything he's seen before. Despite her beauty, she has an accursed body. Maya asks if there is a cure and insists on a treatment plan. The specialist says it's a difficult case, but assures him that with his help, it will be possible to manage. Maya agrees to help Lavielle, willing to do anything for her. The specialist hands him a bottle containing a mixture of daffodil, seed extract, newborn mammal nail, grandeur root, and sand badger oil. Maya asks what it is. The specialist explains that it's a salve passed down for generations in his family. He instructs Maya to apply the elixir to Lavielle's private area every night. After 2 weeks, she will be begging for him, the specialist claims. Maya is intrigued but is warned not to miss a single day, or the elixir will be ineffective, and he won't be able to help again. The specialist adds that it must be applied by a man's touch. He then gives Maya another bottle, and tells him to take a dose every day to regain his lost manhood. Maya is shocked and insists his manhood isn't lost, just temporarily affected by stress. He blames Lavielle, calling her a dead fish unable to arouse him. Maya tells the specialist to keep this matter confidential, and the specialist agrees. After that night, Thino doesn't visit Lavielle for a while because he's busy gathering medicinal ingredients. She enjoys her brief freedom, though she knows it won't last long. Her relationship with Lucien has also cooled since that night, as he hasn't approached her again. 2 weeks later, Maya goes to her room with a bottle. He tells her not to worry anymore because they will both have fun that night. She recoils, feeling a strange fear and asking herself what's happening. Maya is about to proceed when someone knocks on the door. He is very angry, having told everyone not to disturb him that night. The servant apologizes for interrupting and informs him that he has a visitor from the palace. Maya is surprised to receive a message from His Imperial Majesty. He's surprised to receive a message from the Imperial Majesty, especially at that hour. Turning to Lavielle, he assures her he'll return soon and she should behave until then. With that, he heads to his chambers. Lavielle prays fervently that he won't return to torment her, and her prayers are answered when he doesn't come back that night. The next morning during breakfast, Lavielle asks Maya where he's going, as he announces his trip to Ostrin to treat the Empress Dowager, who's recovering in a temple there. He explains that the Emperor is worried and trusts only a few doctors for this illness, himself included, boasting about his skills. Lavielle realizes he won't be home for a while, feeling relieved deep down, but keeping her expression neutral. She notices Lucien staring at her and asks why. Meanwhile, Lucien tells his father that being called for this task proves he's the best doctor around. However, Maya mentions a problem: he didn't plan to travel. The midwife insists he can't miss a day, and he can't bring her along without raising suspicions. Maya realizes there's only one solution, determined to find a way. After breakfast, Maya goes to find Lucien and discovers him engrossed in a book. He asks what Lucien is reading, and Lucien replies it's an encyclopedia of medicinal herbs. Lucien remarks on the abundance of information, saying time flies when he's reading. Maya comments that Lucien will need those books when he becomes a top doctor like himself. He wonders if he can trust his son, feeling like he has no other medical professional he can rely on besides Lucien, who is here with him. Lucien continues reading, mentioning details about the teffia leaf, a potent anesthetic with side effects like impotency. Maya interrupts, saying it's enough reading for now. He then explains why he came to see Lucien, wanting to talk about Lavielle. Maya tells Lucien that he has a big responsibility, as Lavielle's guardian, to find her a good husband. He says he will only be at peace knowing she's happily married and asks if Lucien understands his concern. Lucien assures him that he does. Maya then reveals that the specialist said Lavielle might not be able to conceive due to her condition. Lucien asks if it's that serious. Maya replies that it can be cured through treatment. Despite disliking the thought of anyone touching her, Maya knows he can't take her with him to Ostrin. He explains to Lucien that an elixir must be applied to her genitals for 2 weeks, and that the application requires a man's touch. Since Maya has to leave the next day, he tells Lucien that he is the only doctor available. He asks if Lucien understands what he's asking. Lucien says he understands. Maya informs Lavielle that Lucien will be taking over her treatment. He adds that he dislikes the idea as much as she does. Lavielle starts to protest, but Maya reminds her about the specialist's instructions that the treatment can't be skipped. She feels frustrated, thinking about how she has to be touched by another man and questioning why she has to endure this. Then, she recalls Lucien's offer to run away with her and wonders why that night is on her mind. She questions Maya's belief about Lucien being his son, but he insists they have no other choice, assuring her that he isn't enjoying the situation either. Even with a face of disgust, Maya is determined. Lavielle feels she has glimpsed his sick mind. At dawn, he leaves for Ostrin. She anxiously waits for nightfall, fear filling her heart. She wonders why Lucien accepted the treatment, doubting its effectiveness. She thinks of running away, but cancels the idea, knowing she has nowhere to go and fearing she will get caught. She recalls Lucien's offer to run away with him and wonders if he meant it. Could they really escape together? Her thoughts are interrupted by a knock at the door. She opens it to find Lucien there. He is surprised she is still awake and asks if there is a problem or if she has been waiting for him. She admits she knows what the Marquess has instructed him to do, but tries to explain her hesitation. He cuts her off, saying it wasn't a request but an order from his father. Lavielle staggers and falls onto the bed, expressing her fear and discomfort. She says that while she has endured the Marquess's actions because he scares her, having another man touch her feels unbearable. Lucien reassures her that he won't force her into anything she doesn't want to do. He explains that although his father gave him the order, he respects her choice. He explains that the treatment is meant to help her, as the Marquess wants her to have a normal, happy life. But he insists that the decision is hers, and he will respect whatever she decides. Lavielle is torn, feeling unable to refuse outright. Lucien watches her struggle, understanding her fear and confusion. He waits for her to express her true feelings, knowing that the situation is far from easy for her. Lavielle thinks about how Maya would react if she refused. She imagines him saying, "You'd be on the streets without me. Show me you're grateful by spreading your legs. Do you know how much I spent on that medicine?" She knows he would kill her if she disobeyed. Lucien calls her name and asks if there's a problem. When she doesn't answer, he assumes her silence means refusal and prepares to leave. But then she stops him. "No, let's continue," she says, convincing herself that she should get the treatment since the Marquess went through so much trouble for her. Lucien agrees and tells her to lie down. Meanwhile, Maisie is on her way to check on Lavielle. The Marquess had instructed her to report any sounds and how long Lucien stays in Lavielle's room each night. Maisie was surprised by the request and tried to protest, but the Marquess shut her up and told her to do as she was told. Maisie knocks on the door, but gets no response. She wonders what is going on inside. Flashback. When Lavielle arrives at the manor, it is bright and sunny, just like the life she had hoped for. Maya takes her to her room and asks if she likes it. She admits she likes it a lot, there's sunlight and nice furniture. She thanks him, saying she loves it. He says that's great to hear, as he is ready to do anything for a girl like her. She is shocked when he suddenly grabs her. He asks if she knows why he agreed to help a hopeless girl like her. If she's good, he might even make her his Marchioness. He then tries to force himself on her. She screams and begs for him to stop, or for someone to help her, but there is nobody to help. That's when she realizes she is just a plaything for him. In public, he pretends to be helpful, acting like a father figure to Lavielle until she's back on her feet. But behind closed doors, he demands that she use her body to seduce him if she wants him to consider her as his wife. These assaults become a constant nightmare for her. The next morning, Lavielle and Maisie go for a stroll. Maisie is delighted that her lady is well enough to enjoy some fresh air, emphasizing how important it is for Lavielle's recovery. Lavielle apologizes for troubling Maisie, but Maisie brushes it off, assuring her it's no bother. She asks Lavielle about her sleep the previous night, mentioning her own concerns about Lavielle's recent sleeping issues. Lavielle assures her that she slept well, which isn't entirely untrue. After Lucien applied the elixir the previous night, he silently did his job efficiently and professionally, ensuring not to cause her any harm. Lavielle reflects on Lucien, finding him to be a peculiar man. Lucien sits in the study, writing a letter to Niall. He asks how Niall is doing and apologizes for not sending letters sooner. Lucien explains that he's been busy settling into Maya Manor after meeting Maya, who is exactly as he expected. He admits he's unsure if he should feel glad about it, but hopes their plan will proceed smoothly. Finally, he concludes the letter with, "I'll make your wish come true. Just hang tight a little longer." Every night, Lucien visits Lavielle, and she becomes anxious as soon as the sun sets, because she knows he's coming to apply the elixir. He asks her to relax so she won't hurt herself during the process. Though the situation feels shameful to her, she notices that Lucien's touch is different from the Marquess's cruel and lascivious hands. Gradually, she realizes that Lucien is nothing like him. Encouraged by this realization, she speaks up and asks for help, expressing that it hurts and wondering if there's another way to ease the pain. Lucien explains that some discomfort is normal because her body isn't ready for intimacy yet. However, he offers an alternative approach. He reassures her and gently begins his work, trying to warm her body and calm her down. He notices she feels cold and tense, explaining that relaxation is important to minimize pain. Initially uncomfortable, Lavielle begins to relax and feel warmth from Lucien's, surprising herself as she expected all men to be repulsive after Maya's rough treatment. Lucien's gentle approach feels different to her. She didn't know she could feel this way. Lucien guides her to imagine sinking slowly into water, and encourages her to breathe deeply and steadily. Despite feeling unfamiliar discomfort and unease, she starts to melt. "That's it, you're warming up already," he reassures her before continuing. Lucien asks if Lavielle will join him for breakfast, but Alita informs him that she's feeling unwell. He instructs Alita to ensure Lavielle gets food, emphasizing that she needs to eat. Then, he inquires about good hunting spots, and Alita apologizes for not knowing the area well. Lucien mentions his father's plans to break in a new horse, and considers it wise to choose suitable terrain for the task. Maisie suggests Galatia for hunting, which catches his interest. He asks her to elaborate, and Maisie explains that although the terrain can be challenging, there are plentiful hunting opportunities, and it's ideal for training a new horse. Alita shoots a glare at Maisie for speaking out of turn, reminding her to wait until she's addressed. Maisie quickly apologizes, and Lucien assures her it's fine, appreciating her suggestion to go to Mount Galatia. Alita, still upset with Maisie, warns her to be careful with her words around Lucien, questioning if he's truly their master's son. Maisie confesses she intentionally spoke up, because Lavielle isn't comfortable around him. Alita is taken aback when Maisie reveals Lucien plans to spend 3 days at Galatia, noting it's a challenging place even for seasoned hunters. She mutters to herself that she hopes he takes his time, unaware that Lucien is listening in. Lucien, overhearing their conversation, muses that all of this is for his master, finding the situation increasingly intriguing. The next morning, Maisie informs Lavielle that Lucien has headed to Mount Galatia for hunting, suggesting she take a few days to rest. Lavielle is surprised by Lucien's unpredictability, thinking he would strictly follow orders. She wonders if it's all right to pause her treatment like this. Memories of their night together linger in her mind. She questions herself why she can't stop thinking about it, especially when she believes she only needs him for medical reasons. Just then, Lucien walks in and greets Lavielle, asking if she's planning another stroll. She's surprised to see him and questions if he didn't go hunting as planned. Lucien chuckles, remarking on how quickly news spreads around these parts. Curious, Lavielle hesitates to ask why he's still there. Lucien insists she speak up, urging her to look him in the eye. Lavielle slaps his hand away, warning him not to touch her. Lucien teases her for being feisty, contrasting her demeanor from their previous encounter. Before Lavielle can respond, Maisie rushes in, alarmed by Lavielle's shout. She gasps upon seeing Lucien and questions why he's still present. Lucien seizes the moment and instructs Maisie to pack Lavielle's belongings because she's coming with him. Maisie asks Lucien if it's absolutely necessary to take Lavielle along, expressing concern about the dangers of Mount Galatia. Lucien acknowledges the risks, but insists that Lavielle must accompany him due to a task assigned by his father. He calls Lavielle over to explain to Maisie why she needs to come along. Lavielle reassures Maisie that she'll be fine and promises to return soon. Maisie reluctantly agrees and wishes them a safe journey. Later, Lavielle reflects on her inability to confide in Maisie about the true nature of her situation. She blames herself for Maisie's fear and regrets being unable to offer anything more than superficial reassurances. As they travel towards Galatia, Lucien suggests taking a break and offers his hand to help Lavielle dismount. She declines and manages to dismount on her own. Lucien comments on her apparent experience with riding, assuming she must have had lessons as a noble lady. Lavielle remains silent, not wanting to engage. Still on their journey, Lucien tries to make conversation, suggesting it will be a lonely trip if she doesn't talk. Lavielle retorts that this isn't a simple trip, it feels more like kidnapping due to his coercion. Lucien is surprised by her liveliness, and teasingly suggests she might secretly be happy to be taken away from the manor. Lavielle denies it vehemently, insisting he doesn't understand her feelings. He calls Lavielle's attention to the provisions Maisie packed, bread for her and a shoe for him, and jokes that Maisie must really dislike him. Lavielle questions if he truly wants to act like the Marquess's son, to which Lucien affirms that he is indeed the Marquess's son. She acknowledges this with sarcasm. Lucien then asks Lavielle what she thinks he does for a living. She quips that kidnapping must be part of his job description. He explains that despite his lineage, his mother always wanted him to become a doctor, so he pursued that path out of obligation. Lavielle expresses surprise that someone like him could be a doctor. He asks if she still doesn't trust him, to which she challenges him to prove himself. Ignoring her skepticism, Lucien reveals a necklace, explaining it was his father's last gift to his mother. He reflects on his mother's hardship, and how she never stopped longing for his father. Lavielle apologizes for her earlier comments. Lucien acknowledges his mixed heritage, raised by his mother, and now feels it's time for his father to take responsibility. He empathizes with Lavielle's struggle to survive and admits he once thought his father was a fraud, but now sees him differently. As darkness falls, they reach a small inn outside Rotton. Lavielle questions her choice to travel with Lucien, someone she hardly knows. She fears the Marquess will punish her for leaving the manor. At Eldon, she insists on returning or going back alone. Lucien asks what's wrong, and she explains her fear of Maya finding out. He reassures her his father is away and he's planned for their journey. But they are still in the Marquess's territory, near Amon Gill's place. Amon Gill, he asks. Lavielle confirms it and warns they could be reported as runaways if they stay. Meanwhile, from Marquess' POV, Amon tells the Marquess the Tefia leaf is top-notch for treating the Empress Dowager. When asked about Hinutara petals, Amon admits they are rare and hard to find, despite efforts by herbalists. The Marquess insists on urgency, knowing it's vital for the Empress and Lavielle's treatment. Frustrated by Amon's request for more money, the Marquess reluctantly agrees, suspecting Amon's motives. He wonders if Lucien is properly treating Lavielle. Amon then mentions a girl at the Temple of Lumion, praising her beauty. The Marquess teases Amon for leaving his inn for personal matters. Curious, the Marquess asks about the girl, especially her blonde hair. Amon jokes about how rare blonde hair is among nobles, comparing her to Lavielle's unique qualities. Amon mentions the girl at the temple is a stunning blonde. The Marquess is immediately intrigued and declares his fascination with blonde bombshells. Amon describes how he encountered her when her father was in trouble with debt collectors. He offered to clear her debts in exchange for her company, but she asked for time to decide. This has kept Amon waiting, struggling with his desires every night. The Marquess empathizes, understanding the temptation. After their chat, Amon bids farewell and leaves. Inside the inn, Lavielle tells Lucien about Amon, who supplies herbs to her father. Lucien is surprised that a herbalist also runs an inn. Lavielle explains that Amon has various businesses. When she mentions Amon going to Ostrin to find a wife, Lucien reassures her that Amon's absence means there's no immediate threat. Lavielle recalls meeting Amon, how he viewed her as a commodity for the Marquess's desires. She's shocked that someone like him is getting married. Lucien reaffirms he's only following his father's orders. Lavielle is frustrated with the situation forced upon her. Lucien tries to reassure her, claiming he has a plan to help. Lavielle questions who Lucien truly is and why he appeared in her life. She vents her anger and frustration, feeling her life has been ruined. Lucien acknowledges her pain, but insists he's there to support her, even if she doesn't trust him. Lavielle wrestles with conflicting emotions. She wonders if Lucien could be her salvation despite the shame she feels. Finally, she gathers the courage to ask him for help, revealing her desperation and vulnerability. She admits she doesn't want children, especially not Thenos, feeling weakened lately. Lucien asks if she's tired after their journey. She denies it. He's pleased she's relaxed and applies the elixir, urging her to stay calm. He notices her softened demeanor and remarks on the elixir's effectiveness. She feels it's not the time for conversation. He reassures her and checks if there's any pain. Afterward, she asks if it's over, and he confirms. Feeling a sense of emptiness without the discomfort, she reflects silently on her thoughts. Two girls argue over a yellow ribbon. Lavielle feels lighter today, but wonders how long they'll stay here with Lucien. There's a knock at the door, and a lady brings breakfast. Lavielle asks how long she's worked here. Rosie, the lady, says about 3 years and mentions managing the inn. Lavielle learns Rosie handles the inn alone and asks about Marquess Theno Meyer. Rosie confirms he visits for hunting. Lavielle changes the topic and asks Rose's name and how far Mount Galatia is. Rosie says it's an hour away and asks if they are here to hunt. Lavielle jokes about hunting with her husband, Lucien. Rosie compliments Lavielle's beauty. Lavielle thanks her and promises to recommend Rosie to Amon. She gives Rosie coins as a token of appreciation. Rosie thanks her and learns Lavielle's name is Molly Hyacinth. Molly prepares to leave, but bumps into Lucien at the door. She apologizes, and they exchange glances. "Did you sleep well?" Lucien asks her as they sit down for breakfast. She nods slightly, finding the breakfast unremarkable, but agrees to eat more before they depart. "Why are you being so caring today?" she queries, curious about his sudden attentiveness. Lucien chuckles softly, explaining it's a husband's duty to take care of his wife. She blushes at his comment, and he playfully teases her about her flustered reaction. He then brings up Molly Hyacinth and comments on Lavielle's slip-up in conversation. She defends herself, explaining she felt compelled to respond to Molly. He suggests it might have been wiser to stay quiet, as now Molly remembers their faces and might gossip. Concerned about the potential risk, Lucien jokingly asks if he should eliminate Molly to prevent any trouble. Lavielle scolds him for his joke, emphasizing it's not funny. Lucien clarifies he only wanted to ease her worries and suggests Molly's presence could complicate things. Feeling uneasy about their situation, Lavielle regrets getting involved with Lucien and questions his intentions. Lucien reassures her that he wants to help her, reminding her it was she who sought his assistance in the first place. She reflects on their shared memories and realizes they've spent enough time at the inn. If they don't leave soon, they'll end up staying the night. Lucien assures her they'll depart after she finishes eating. Rosie inquires if they are leaving now. Lucien thanks her for her hospitality and kindness. Rosie notices Lavielle doesn't look well, and asks if breakfast wasn't to her liking. Lavielle recalls Lucien's earlier remark about jokingly wanting to kill Rosie. She dismisses it, saying she's just dealing with mild anemia, and compliments Rosie on the breakfast. Rosie wishes them a safe journey, as they prepare to leave. As they continue their journey, Lucien suggests taking a break and sitting on the grass. Lavielle suddenly asks him if he would really kill Rosie. Lucien laughs and clarifies it was just a joke to ease her worries. He reassures her that as a doctor, he wouldn't harm anyone. Lavielle, still shaken, questions why he would joke about something so serious. Lucien apologizes sincerely, admitting he didn't realize how scared she was. Lavielle accepts his apology, but jokingly insists he never call her Ms. Hyacinth again. Lucien playfully asks why not, saying he thinks it suits her. Lavielle declines to explain further, opting to drink some water instead. Lucien remembers that night and starts staring at Lavielle. She asks him what he's looking at. He quickly changes the subject and asks if she's ready to go back on the road. Then, he offers her a ride on Ally, the horse. Lavielle hesitates, but agrees, saying she hasn't ridden alone in a long time. Lucien reassures her that Ally likes people and is used to them. Lavielle worries about leaving him stranded if she escapes with Ally, but Lucien jokes about it. She thinks about saying she'll come straight back, but he suggests she ride far away where no one will find her. Enchanted by his words, she rides off into the sunset. Two sisters are arguing over a yellow ribbon. One insists she was promised it today, while the other argues that their dad said they have to share it. Lavielle watches them from the balcony, remembering her own sister. In the flashback, Lavielle is a child, talking to her mom. She tells her mom that the baby won't stop smiling at her. Her mom explains that the baby knows Lavielle is her older sister. Lavielle asks when the baby will start calling her big sister. Her mom reassures her that since the baby can already say mama and papa, it won't be long. Lavielle thinks about how soft, warm, tiny, and sweet-smelling her baby sister is. She can't wait for her to grow up and play with her. Presently, the sun is already setting. Lavielle realizes they have come quite far, but isn't sure where they are. She wonders where Lucien has gone. She remembers what he told her and thinks about whether she should run away. She worries about how much money she has left and knows she can't get far. Thino is not someone to take lightly, he will stop at nothing to find her. She dreams of reuniting with her little sister, but knows it might be impossible. She decides they should go back. She thinks they left Lucien around here and wonders if he has already left. She calls out for him and tries to turn the horse, but she pulls too hard. The horse, Ally, throws her off and dashes away. Lavielle is now on the ground, thinking she might have sprained her ankle. She knows she has to find help, but worries that no one will pass by. She is also afraid of feral beasts. Lavielle is still on the ground when two men pass by and hear her. They stop and look around until they spot her. One of them asks if she needs help. Relieved, she asks them for help and explains that she fell off her horse and sprained her ankle. She asks if they can take her to a nearby inn, but they say they aren't headed that way. She apologizes and explains she can't move because of her ankle. One of the men offers to take a look at her ankle, but she declines, saying it's not that bad. The man insists, trying to touch her ankle, but she pulls away, still insisting there's no need. The men become suspicious and frustrated. They tell her that if she won't let them help, she should find her own way out. She is shocked and tries to protest, but they accuse her of being suspicious for not letting them check her injury. Lavielle considers mentioning Thino, knowing it might get the men to help her, but she realizes that if he finds out, she'll be in even bigger trouble. As she hesitates, one of the men starts to make crude assumptions about her, suggesting she must be a prostitute waiting for clients. The other agrees, saying this must be how she lures them in. Lavielle is shocked and confused, asking them what they mean. The man grabs her hand, making a lewd comment about how she'll be fun, and that they'll help her if she does her job. Lavielle shouts for him to stop, but he mocks her, asking if she's afraid they'll ruin her. He adds that she must be hungry and cold and that they'll warm her up. Lavielle screams for help, but the man assures her they don't intend to kill her, just to have a good time. Lavielle wonders how things turned out like this. All she wanted was a moment of freedom. She screams for them to stop and tries to push the man off. He tells her to be a good girl and know her place, while the other warns not to damage her face. Lavielle feels desperate, thinking she would rather have died with her parents than live through this. Just as the man is about to hurt her, a gunshot rings out, and he falls down. Lucien steps out, saying he's relieved to have arrived just in time. He mentions that he was itching to test out his hunting skills. Lucien steps forward, saying he arrived just in time, and was itching to test out his hunting skills. The remaining man, now afraid, asks who he is. Lucien dismisses the question, saying there's no need for him to know. When the man angrily asks about dueling, Lucien replies that dueling is for gentlemen, not for vermin that need to be put down. The man tries to talk his way out, saying they thought Lavielle was a prostitute wandering the woods. He suggests they could talk it out. Lucien orders him to leave, but then changes his mind, saying it's important to tie up loose ends. As the man begs for his life, Lucien pulls the trigger. Lucien rushes to Lavielle, asking if she's okay. He explains that Ally returned alone, so he knew something was wrong and apologizes for being late. Lavielle, upset, accuses him of being serious about hurting Rosie. Lucien reassures her it was just a joke, reminding her that he wouldn't normally hurt anyone. He explains that this situation was different, it was 2 against 1, and they had rifles. He had to even the playing field. Lucien points out that if the men weren't brutes, they wouldn't have attacked her, and one wrong move could have meant death for both of them. Lavielle acknowledges that while she wished he had gotten help, she realizes she might have been assaulted in the meantime. I have no intention of denying what I've done, but I needed to protect you, Lucien explains. He asks if she's hurt, and she mentions her ankle is sprained but not broken. Lavielle recalls his words about protecting her and wonders if she deserves it. Lucien suggests he gather herbs to help with her injury. He mentions seeing hule trees nearby earlier. Lavielle hesitates and expresses fear about being left alone. Reluctantly, she asks him not to go alone. Lucien agrees and suggests they return to the inn to treat her ankle. They return to the inn, where Lucien asks Rosie for medicinal herbs from the storeroom. Rosie agrees to help and also offers clean clothes for Lavielle. Lucien thanks her, expressing gratitude for her kindness. Rosie comments on Lavielle falling off the horse and hopes she gets well soon. Back in their room, Lucien mentions that Rosie seems to like Lavielle. Lavielle jokes about Rosie lending her clothes, noting that being friendly pays off. Lucien assures her that with the ointment and a few days of rest, she should recover soon. Lavielle is surprised at the prospect of staying for a few days, worried about potential encounters with Amon or Thino if they return during that time. Lucien reassures Lavielle that it will be a while before the Marquess returns, as he's tending to the Empress Dowager's serious condition. Lavielle feels overwhelmed by everything that's happened and worries about their safety, considering the events of today now feel distant. She questions how Lucien can remain so calm after what happened, knowing they could be caught with the bodies left behind. Lucien asks if she feels sympathy for the men he shot. Lavielle denies it but is still anxious. Lucien tells her not to dwell on it and emphasizes that her recovery is their top priority. He encourages her to rest and assures her they'll continue her treatment as planned for the day. Lavielle asks about today's treatment. Lucien tells her not to do too much since she looks tired. She mentions always feeling tired. He says not many people have happy lives. She thinks there might be more happiness than he thinks. He agrees that rich people usually do better. She remembers feeling not rich when her parents were alive. He asks if she's thinking about her life before things changed. She says that's all in the past now. He says our past shapes who we are. She notes he's never heard much about her life except that she's from Rob. She reflects on her past, feeling she had a chance at a peaceful life, but lacked the courage to end things. Lucien listens and acknowledges her feelings. She explains how she ended up feeling trapped in Rotton, relying on the Marquess for protection. Lucien reassures her, saying she's alive because she's brave and survival is the hardest part. He encourages her, telling her she's stronger than she thinks. She disagrees, saying she's not strong and reveals her deep longing for her missing baby sister. She recounts how their nanny disappeared with her sister, despite her father's efforts to find them. She still holds on to hope that her sister is alive, which keeps her going. Lucien acknowledges her resilience, saying it's good she's kept surviving and enduring all this time. She addresses Reverend Klein as Levrian, but he prefers to be called Levi. She insists on Levi, but he reminds her he's busy with an important guest, the famous doctor from Rotton attending to the Empress Dowager. He instructs her to behave well in his presence. She greets the Reverend again, calling him Luz, and teasingly asks if Levi is bothering the priest. Levrian denies this, stating he's not interested in him that much. Luz playfully suggests otherwise, noting how he follows Levi around like a little duckling. Levrian denies it again, explaining he only wanted to show the Reverend the riddles he had just solved. They hear a commotion outside as a man demands to see someone. Levrian rushes out and confronts the man, asking why he's causing trouble. The man accuses Levrian of working at the temple without paying him back. Levrian tells him to leave, but the man becomes aggressive and attacks her. Reverend Klein steps in and questions the man's actions on holy grounds. The man insults Levrian and refuses to leave until he gets what he wants. Reverend Klein intervenes again, asking Levrian if there's anything she wants to say. She denies it, and Reverend Klein tells the man to leave. Fuming, the man threatens Levrian before finally departing. "Are you okay?" Klein asks Levrian, expressing concern. He apologizes for the incident and suggests she finish her chores. As Levrian prepares to leave, Klein stops her and asks if she's hiding something. He insists on knowing everything about the man and why he came looking for trouble at the temple. In the flashback, Levrian asks to see the priest, but the lady denies her request. Reverend Klein arrives and introduces himself. Levrian asks if he prays for everyone regardless of their status, and he confirms he does. She then asks him to pray for her mother's soul, who passed away recently due to overworking. Klein listens to her story and asks for her name, Levrian Luzel. He promises to pray for her mother and she tearfully thanks him. End of the flashback. Levrian reflects on Reverend Klein's words. She worries about potentially being kicked out, but reassures herself that she can find work elsewhere if needed. However, she regrets not sharing her true feelings with the priest earlier. Reverend Klein calls her in and assures her he won't scold her. Lavielle asks why he summoned her, and he questions her about the man who caused the earlier commotion. She reveals it was her father, despite believing he had passed away. She explains that after her mother's death, he suddenly reappeared, drowning his sorrows in alcohol and blaming her for her mother's demise. Curious, Reverend Klein asks if her father can prove his paternity. Lavielle mentions he knew intimate details about her mother that only her real father would know. Reverend Klein understands, but wonders why her father is behaving so aggressively, suspecting there might be more to it than just drunkenness. She reveals to Reverend Klein that her father came looking for her because he's in debt. Klein offers his support and encourages her to confide in him. Lavielle hesitates, feeling reluctant to share her troubles with Reverend Klein. She explains that due to her father's debts, she's being pressured into an unwanted marriage with Amon Gill, a businessman from Rotton. Her father agreed to let Gill pay off his debts in exchange for her hand, and now demands all her earnings from working at the temple. Reverend Klein expresses his disdain for the situation, and Lavielle agrees. He asks if she knows Gill personally, and she describes him as an innkeeper and seller of medicinal seeds from Rotton. Reverend Klein recognizes the name and resolves to ask the Marquess about him later. He then asks Lavielle what she wants to do. Uncertain, she admits she's nearing the age for marriage, but feels sad about leaving the temple. Despite this, she believes she'll adapt to her new life, as she always has, though she finds the sudden turn of events unsettling. She apologizes for the day's events and promises it won't happen again. Reverend Klein comments on her father's rough demeanor and asks how she plans to handle him. She says if nothing else works out, she'll reluctantly agree to the marriage. He thanks her for sharing everything and she bids him farewell before leaving. He recalls her gratitude for allowing her to work at the temple and reflects on other memories they've shared. Thinking about her potential marriage, he wonders how he could let Lavielle go through with such an arrangement. In frustration, he curses and smashes the bottle. He berates his daughter, calling her useless for ignoring him and refusing a marriage proposal from Amon. In the flashback, Herzen is confronted by someone demanding repayment. He pleads for more time, but the creditor refuses, suggesting another way to settle the debt, through Herzen's daughter, whom he claims is working at Lumion Temple. Herzen is shocked to hear his daughter is alive and asks why the creditor wants her. The man explains he wants Herzen's daughter as a bride for himself, admiring her looks. Herzen is given an ultimatum: bring his daughter to the creditor and the debt will be forgiven, or face severe consequences if he refuses. He scolds Lavielle for considering refusing the marriage proposal, insisting she should obey him without question. Meanwhile, Lucien applies medicine to Lavielle's injury and asks if she's in pain. She reassures him and explains the necessity of continuing treatment as prescribed. Lucien encourages her efforts and advises her to rest. Unable to sleep, Lavielle regrets bringing up the issue that led to their current situation. Lucien notices she's awake when he checks on her and remarks on her restlessness. She begins to respond, interrupted by his presence. Unable to sleep, Lavielle is startled when Lucien offers to help cure her insomnia with physical intimacy. She hesitates and tells him he can't proceed, but he persists, insisting he wants to dispel her loneliness. Lavielle tries to stop him, but he presses on, declaring his feelings for her. She listens, torn by conflicting emotions, especially regarding Marquess Meyer. In her mind, she reflects that if she loved the Marquess, this situation might feel different, but she knows she can't possibly feel that way about him. Lavielle asks him not to bring up Marquess Meyer. Eventually, she kisses Lucien, deciding to set aside their worries for the night. She wonders if this is the right choice as things progress. Lucien expresses his desire for her, admiring her beauty, but Lavielle questions if his feelings are genuine. Eventually, they become intimate together. Lavielle awakens, confused by her dream about Lucien. She questions her sanity, unable to believe it. Lucien checks on her sleep, and she responds hesitantly. They discuss her ankle and Rosie, whom Lucien had to attend to. Lavielle feels flustered today and panics when Lucien notices her flushed face, mistaking it for a fever. She hastily stops him from getting closer. Embarrassed, she clarifies she's just feeling hot and accepts his offer of medicine. Alone again, she wonders what's happening to her feelings. Lucien asks if Lavielle needs anything else. She expresses a desire to go outside for fresh air, but he advises against it due to her ankle. Lavielle suggests sitting outside instead, which he reluctantly agrees to. Lucien ends up carrying her outside since walking would worsen her injury. Lavielle hesitates, but he insists there's no other choice. Resigned, she accepts his help. They decide to go for a walk after breakfast. Lavielle is a bit self-conscious because of her dream about Lucien. He remarks on the weather and advises her to keep her coat on because it's still chilly. Lavielle jokes about her weight, but Lucien reassures her. He mentions her small appetite and encourages her to eat well for strength. Lucien also brings up finding her long-lost sister, and believes she's strong enough to achieve it. Finally, Lavielle gathers the courage to ask Lucien a favor. She asks if he minds doing her a favor. He initially teases her about it, but she insists it's nothing. Curious, he listens as she requests a book titled Molly Hyacinth. He realizes it's not a pseudonym, but a book title she enjoys. He laughs in surprise, and she playfully scolds him. Lavielle explains it's just something to read while she's indoors. Lucien agrees to stop by the bookstore later. She thanks him warmly. Rosie notices Lavielle joining her for lunch and asks about her ankle. Lavielle thanks Rosie for the clothes and apologizes for missing breakfast. Rosie explains soldiers caused trouble earlier due to 2 deaths in Galatia, which triggers unease in Lavielle's mind. Lucien reassures her accidents happen during hunting. Rosie shares her frustration with the soldiers' questioning, citing previous tragic incidents at the inn. Lavielle sympathizes, but Rosie worries she's interrupting their time together. Lavielle asks if the soldiers have left, and Rosie confirms they have, but they asked her to report any suspicious behavior. Lavielle panics, fearing suspicion despite telling Rosie about her horse accident. Rosie brings up their presence in Galatia the previous day, but Lucien assures her they didn't notice anything unusual. Rosie expresses relief and offers her help if they need anything. Lavielle worries Rosie might have informed the soldiers despite Lucien's reassurance. Lucien notices Lavielle's uneasy demeanor and asks about her ankle, to which she insists she's fine. They discuss their extended stay due to Lavielle's injury, which frustrates her, but Lucien emphasizes the need for proper healing before they can leave. Lavielle questions Lucien's calm demeanor despite the soldiers investigating. He tries to reassure her, but she's anxious about potentially being implicated. Lucien notices her nervousness and teases her playfully. He challenges her to guess his tell, which makes her curious but unsure. Lucien calls out to Rosie, expressing a sense of unease. Lavielle, meanwhile, is gripped with anxiety, feeling like she shouldn't have trusted Lucien. Lucien then mentions to Rosie that he and Molly heard strange gunshots outside the day before, and he wants to report it to the soldiers himself. The soldier asks Lucien for more details about the gunshots they heard. Lucien explains they were heading to Galatia for a horseback riding practice with Molly when they saw 2 men fighting near Ione Rock on the west side. Lavielle wonders if Lucien's calm demeanor hides an elaborate plan to frighten her. She worries about accusing him of the crime. Lucien describes the men as arguing, seemingly on a hunting trip gone wrong. The soldier asks if they were arguing, and Lucien confirms, mentioning they didn't get a good look at them, but their description matches. The soldier thanks Lucien for the statement, and he responds it's the right thing to do. The soldier asks Lavielle if she saw the men. She confirms and then breaks down in tears. Lucien comforts her, mentioning Molly's tender heart, and how worried she was about the men even after they left. Lavielle knows if she tells the truth, Lucien will be arrested, and then she can finally return to the manor. The soldier asks Lavielle if everything Lucien said was true, and she confirms it, feeling conflicted because telling the truth means losing her chance at freedom. After their questioning, the soldiers leave, thanking her for cooperating. Lucien praises her for a job well done, but Lavielle calls him insane for involving the soldiers despite wanting to avoid attention. He explains he was curious about what the soldiers knew, which angers Lavielle further. She worries they might get suspicious, but Lucien reassures her and tries to lighten the mood. Lavielle remains upset, refusing to discuss her tale with him. Lucien offers her water to calm her nerves, and she reluctantly accepts. "Shall I tell you why I really called them?" Lucien asks Lavielle. Confused, she questions him further. Lucien admits he wanted to test her, to see if she would cover for him or reveal the truth. He declares her his accomplice now that she has concealed his actions. Meanwhile, Maisie, Lavielle's superior, receives a letter from their master inquiring about Lady Lavielle. Maisie hesitates, knowing Lavielle's current situation is delicate. She must respond by nightfall. Maisie ponders whether to confess that Lavielle has left with Lucien, or to fabricate a story about her well-being at home. Maisie wrestles with the consequences of lying, knowing the truth could lead to trouble if their master discovers Lavielle's absence. She recalls Maya's strict instructions to report everything directly to him before he left. She wonders about her loyalties in his absence. Maisie thinks maybe it would be best to follow his orders to avoid his fury. But her superior reminds her that lying could endanger Lady Lavielle further. "You must not lie, Maisie," the superior emphasizes. Lavielle confronts Lucien, asking if he's playing games with her emotions. He denies it, but she presses him, feeling manipulated by his actions. Lucien explains he enjoys seeing her emotions, like a doll coming to life. This confuses Lavielle, who feels rattled by his cryptic behavior. After a tumultuous day, Lucien wishes her good night and leaves, leaving Lavielle questioning why he's treating her this way. She breaks down in tears, wondering why he has done this to her. Klein's father scolds him for making Lady Elena cry and urges him to consider marriage to her for the sake of their family's honor. Klein, dedicated to his role as a priest, refuses, citing his commitment to serving the Lord. Despite his father's insistence, Klein stands firm, disappointing his father. Later, Klein reflects on Levrien's words about marriage and confesses his unspoken feelings, knowing he cannot pursue them. Maya feels impatient at the Empress Dowager's slow recovery and wonders about receiving updates on Lavielle's treatment. He finds solace in the scent of Tesha leaves and reflects on Levrien's beauty, reminiscent of someone dear to him. Interrupted by a knock, he allows Klein to enter, curious about his purpose. Klein inquires about Amon Gill, prompting Maya to share his knowledge and affirm his charitable work. Pleased with Klein's acquaintance with Amon, Maya agrees to arrange a meeting between them. Levi is absent-mindedly sweeping when Luz notices something is off. Levi confesses that the drunkard they encountered was actually her father, leaving Luz stunned. They sit down to talk, and Levi shares her dilemma about having to marry to settle her father's debt. Luz listens attentively and offers advice, urging Levi to find out more about the man she's supposed to marry beyond his wealth. Levi admits feeling tempted by the prospect of financial security, but worries about the happiness of such a marriage. Luz suggests consulting Reverend Klein for guidance, emphasizing the importance of making a well-thought-out decision. Levi mentions Klein's advice to consider everything carefully, but reveals he didn't say much more than that. Luz reflects on Klein's care for Levi and silently acknowledges his wisdom. As Amon approached Klein, he greeted him and introduced himself. Klein confirmed his identity and they began walking together. Amon expressed his curiosity about visiting a temple for the first time, noting its solemnity. Klein assured him that the temple was open to everyone. Their conversation shifted to medicinal herbs, which Amon needed. Klein acknowledged his request and agreed to provide the best quality herbs available. Amon mentioned he was usually in Rotton, but was currently in Ostrin for personal reasons. As Amon and Klein walked together, Amon shared that he was in Ostrin to meet his new wife, and was eagerly awaiting her response. Klein listened, understanding the importance of family matters. Curious, Klein asked about Amon's future wife. Amon described her as having rare pure blonde hair, which he considered a significant trait. He joked that her occupation, as an errand girl, didn't matter to him, suggesting she could even be a prostitute for all he cared, laughing at his own remark. Klein listened to Amon's description with interest, noting his unusual criteria for choosing a wife. Klein thinks to himself that he doesn't truly love Lavielle, he sees her more as a wench or a prostitute. He wonders if her hair color is real. Amon questions if it's possible that Lavielle's hair isn't natural. Klein considers sourcing herbs for 300 patients, but realizes it's too much for him alone. Amon offers to help, despite being occupied with his wife in Ostrin. Klein agrees, and Amon promises to pay up front, knowing nobles like Klein have deep pockets. Amon decides to take half of the payment now and the rest later. Klein wishes him a safe journey. Lavielle feels uneasy as she walks home, even the temple seeming a bit scary at night. I should hurry, she thinks to herself, resolving to stay more focused on her chores next time. Suddenly, she hears footsteps behind her and turns around. It's Reverend Klein, walking hurriedly to catch up with her. Lavielle questions Reverend Klein, as he confesses his love for her, admitting he had denied his feelings until learning of her impending marriage. Klein kisses her, expressing his long-hidden affection. She hesitates, conflicted by his priestly vows and her own insecurities about their differences. Despite her fears, Klein reassures her, declaring he can withstand any consequences to be with her. Lavielle questions if what happened was just a dream, feeling uneasy about dreaming something so inappropriate involving a priest. She continues her work in the garden, trying to focus despite her distracted thoughts. When she accidentally hurts her hands, she blames her lack of focus on the lingering effects of the dream. She reflects on her upcoming marriage and notices how unfazed Reverend Klein seemed by it. Although she feels conflicted, she decides to appreciate all Reverend Klein has done for her. Amon arrives unexpectedly, explaining he's there for work, but offers to help Lavielle with her tasks. She initially declines, but eventually accepts his assistance. Amon comments on how long she's been working at the place and sympathizes with her need for money. Lavielle explains that she took the job out of necessity, but finds it bearable. Amon assures Lavielle that if she joins him, she won't have to worry about money again, and he can provide everything she desires. She admits feeling nervous about leaving Ostrin since she's never been outside before. Amon suggests they stop in Rotton on their way, where he believes she'll enjoy seeing how great it is. He proposes they pick a home together there and promises they can live happily together. Lavielle wrestles with her feelings, unsure of what to do next. When Amon notices her injured hands, she brushes it off, but he insists on treating them with ointment he brought along. Lavielle is surprised as Amon introduces her to Reverend Klein, who unexpectedly walks in. Amon mentions he was about to introduce them officially and reveals that Lavielle is the woman he had previously mentioned to Klein. Klein acknowledges Lavielle with familiarity, referring to her affectionately as our Levi, which catches Lavielle off guard. She wonders if Klein intentionally used a nickname in front of her. Amon asks Klein if he thinks Lavielle and he look good together. Klein remembers thinking badly of Lavielle before and knows Amon doesn't truly love her. He replies that they look well matched. Amon is pleased and says that even a messenger of God agrees. Lavielle thanks Klein, who then says he needs to go. As Klein walks away, he feels troubled. He thinks that if he wasn't a priest, he wouldn't let someone like Amon near Lavielle. He struggles with his feelings for her, knowing he vowed to serve the Lord. Klein goes to High Priest Havanus's room and knocks. Havanus calls him in and thanks him for coming. He tells Klein that something bad has been noticed in the West, and it seems to have woken up after 50 years of silence. Amon insists on treating Lavielle's hands, but she asks him to stop calling her Levi. Annoyed by her request, Amon thinks to himself that once she belongs to him, he'll make her obey. He believes she should be grateful a rich man like him wants her. Lavielle declines the treatment, saying the cuts don't bother her. Amon warns her about potential scars, and though she finds him a bit rough, she tries to see the good in him. She asks if he's going back to Rotton today, and he explains he has urgent herbs to get for the priest. He invites her to come with him, but she declines, citing her workload. Amon then asks if she's close with Reverend Klein, and Lavielle replies they've known each other since she was young. This puzzles Amon, who wonders why a top priest is close to an errand girl. Suspicious, he questions if her hair is natural and if she might be deceiving him. Lavielle wishes him a safe journey to Rotton. As Amon leaves, he decides he needs to investigate her further. Lavielle remembers Lucien accusing her of being his accomplice, and wonders what he wants from her. She questions what she should do next when she hears a knock at the door. Lucien tells her to sleep well and leaves, but she notices he left a bottle behind. Confused, she recalls the specialist's words, "Nothing will change no matter how hard they try, and her pain will only get worse over time." Determined to change things, she gets out of bed. Feeling defiant, she thinks about how Lucien enjoys looking down on her with a calm expression. Wanting to see him flustered, she pours the elixir away. Two sisters are playing downstairs, chatting about something strange. One of them brings up the idea of demons from old stories, while the other dismisses it. The first one insists it's true, mentioning something their dad told them. Her sister isn't convinced, thinking it was just a way to scare them. Their aunt walks in and reminds them to play nicely. One of the sisters, still curious, asks if what they heard about demons is real. The other sister is quick to say it's all nonsense, but the aunt admits she heard similar tales when she was younger, though she's never seen anything herself. This only makes the first sister more sure of her point, while the other remains doubtful. Lavielle stands on the balcony, quietly observing the conversation from a distance. Rosie approaches Lavielle with a concerned look and gently asks how she's feeling. Lavielle gives her a small smile and reassures her that she's feeling much better now, but she's curious about what's going on. Rosie explains that since Lavielle didn't finish her dinner last night, she wanted to make sure she ate something good this morning. So, she prepared a hearty breakfast for her, insisting that Lavielle needs to eat well to regain her strength. Lavielle thanks her sincerely, touched by the gesture, and Rosie waves it off like it's nothing. She adds that she would love to stay and chat more, but she has a lot to do today. Before she can finish her thought, Rosie suddenly wobbles and collapses. Lavielle gasps and rushes to help her up, her heart racing. She asks if Rosie is okay, genuinely worried. Rosie brushes it off, saying it's probably just a headache, but she admits that she's been really stressed out lately because of a guest who checked in several days ago. Lavielle listens closely, sensing that there's more to the story. Rosie continues, explaining that the guest has been staying in one of the rooms for almost a week now. Oddly enough, he mentioned when he first arrived that he didn't need any cleaning, so she hasn't been inside his room at all. At first, she was happy to have a break from her usual duties, but then she started to notice something strange. The guest hasn't touched his breakfast at all. She started to worry, so she knocked on his door to check on him, but there was no answer. Lavielle furrows her brow, finding the whole situation odd. She asks if the guest did anything unusual that might explain this behavior. Rosie shakes her head, saying he seemed normal enough when he first arrived, but now she's not so sure. She admits that she thought about forcing her way into the room to make sure everything was all right, but she was too scared of what she might find or what might happen if she did. Rosie goes on to say that in moments like these, she really wishes Mr. Amon were around to help, but unfortunately, she has no idea when he'll be back. Lavielle, wanting to help, offers to go with her to check on the guest, saying that it's safer if they go together. Rosie hesitates, concerned about them both being women and if it's really safe. She even considers asking Lavielle's husband, but then she remembers that he went out earlier. Lavielle quietly wonders why Lucien left without saying anything, but she doesn't voice her thoughts. Rosie quickly changes the subject, telling Lavielle to forget she mentioned asking her husband. She says she can always call someone else if needed and suggests that maybe the guest just likes his privacy and prefers to be left alone. Lavielle agrees that could be true, trying to ease Rose's worries. Rosie nods and adds that she's sure the guest is taking care of himself, and that maybe he's just eating his breakfast outside, enjoying the fresh air. Lavielle nods in agreement, but there's still a lingering sense of unease between them. Rosie, still worried, asks Lavielle if she thinks the guest might have hung himself. She confides that she hasn't seen him leave his room since he checked in. Lavielle quickly reassures her, saying she's sure that hasn't happened. But Rosie can't shake the thought and mentions that it's something that does happen from time to time. The more she thinks about it, the more it starts to make sense in her mind. Lavielle, seeing how anxious Rosie is becoming, tells her not to be scared. She promises that once Lucien gets back, she'll ask him to check on the guest. Rosie feels relieved and thanks Lavielle, expressing how glad she is that they are both there. She admits that she's been so tired lately, taking care of everything by herself. As Rosie talks, Lavielle can't help but think about how kind and friendly Rosie is. She doesn't deserve to be in such a difficult situation. Lavielle wishes she could do more for her, especially considering how much Rosie has been through. Rosie then says she should get back to work, but Lavielle gently advises her not to overdo it, concerned about her well-being. Lavielle's thoughts drift back to her own life. If she were still the Count's daughter, she would have the power to help Rosie and free her from this place. She doesn't want to ask Lucien for any favors, especially since she's still uneasy about the guest. Something about him feels off. Has he been starving himself this whole time? What could he possibly be doing, locked away in that room? Meanwhile, somewhere else, an old man is consumed by anger, vowing to kill Amon Gills. Lavielle doesn't know it yet, but the tension surrounding the guest and this man's vow will soon intertwine with her life and those around her. One of the reverends asks Reverend Klein about the Empress Dowager's condition. Klein explains that the Marquess is preparing a new herbal medicine, and he's confident they'll have good news soon. The other reverend is relieved and thanks Reverend Klein for taking the time to visit. He then mentions that something troubling has been observed in the West. After 50 years of quiet, it seems that something dark has awakened. Klein furrows his brow and asks what he means by they, wondering if he's referring to demons. The other reverend nods, confirming that there's no doubt. He explains that the once fertile lands are drying up, and crops are turning black and withering. It looks like these dark forces are planning something for Lumien's creation day. Even though they've tried purification rituals at the nearby temples, it's not enough. If the devil's miasma keeps spreading, a plague could break out. Klein says he'll go to the west since he's the holiest power after the high priest. He's confident he can help. The high priest warns him that he can't face this alone, but Klein assures him that he'll gather some priests and set out tonight. The high priest is grateful for Klein's willingness to help and mentions that the highest concentration of miasma was found in Galatia. Klein realizes that Galatia is known as the hunting ground, and with all that miasma, he knows he'll need to be very careful. He agrees and says he'll be vigilant. In his mind, Klein hesitates. He'd rather not leave Levrian right now, but with Amon gone, he hopes everything will be all right in his absence. Even in the afternoon, Lucien still hasn't come back. Lavielle decides to head downstairs for some fresh air. Rosie spots her in the hallway and asks why she's out there. Lavielle explains that she just needed a little air. Rosie checks if her ankle is feeling better, and Lavielle says it's fine for a short walk. She plans to sit outside for a bit. Rosie tells her to call if she needs anything and she'll come right out. Lavielle thanks her and goes outside. As she steps out, Lavielle wonders where Lucien could be. The sun is setting and he's still not back. She starts to think he might be out taming Ally, or maybe he just left her alone. She could go back to the manor herself, but she's not sure if she should. She knows if she returns now, things will be tough for her. She might feel like a burden, and even the servants might look down on her. Maybe running away would be better. Just then, Lucien walks up and greets her. Lucien comments that it's getting cold and asks why she's out here. He wonders if she's been waiting for him. Lavielle says she just needed some fresh air. Lucien explains that he was planning to return soon, but it took him a while to find what he was looking for. He promises to let her know where he's going next time, and asks her not to be upset. Lavielle assures him she isn't. Rosie then comes outside and calls Lavielle by her formal name, Ms. Hyacinth. She asks if Lavielle has been out here waiting for her husband the whole time. Lavielle quickly says that's not the case. Rosie responds, saying it makes sense now why Lavielle looked down. She barely ate anything and must have felt quite lonely without her husband. Lavielle insists that's not true. Lavielle and Lucien head to their room. As they walk in, Lavielle quickly says she hopes he doesn't misunderstand what Rosie said. She really wasn't waiting for him all day. Lucien reassures her that he figured as much. He adds that if anyone was waiting, it was probably for what he has in his hand. Lucien then pulls out a book. Lavielle looks at it and wonders if it's the Molly Hyacinth. Lucien confirms it is and says it was surprisingly hard to find. He had to search for a long time before he found it. Lavielle asks if that's why he was out all day. She thinks that maybe he felt sorry for making her feel flustered yesterday. Lucien explains that he wanted to get the book because she liked it so much. He also has another gift for her. When she asks what it is, he tells her to guess. It's something she might need for her great escape. Lavielle jokingly guesses it's a gun. Lucien laughs and asks if that's the first thing she thought of. He says she's a lot scarier than he thought. Lavielle tells him to stop teasing and just tell her what it is. Lucien says it's not a gun and tells her to open the gift. As Lavielle unwraps the present, she finds a pair of shoes. Lucien asks if she's disappointed that it's not a gun. Lavielle says no, it's just a surprise. Lucien explains that her old shoes looked like they needed replacing, so he got her these. He suggests they try them on. Lavielle puts on the shoes and they fit perfectly. She asks how he knew her size, and Lucien says he has a good eye for that kind of thing. Lavielle agrees and says he's right about that. Lucien tells Lavielle that he wanted to get her some clothes, too. Lavielle asks if something happened. He explains that he's never bought women's clothing before, so he gave up. All the stores were full of women, and he couldn't bring himself to go in there alone. He asks if she's laughing, and Lavielle admits she is, saying it's funny to imagine him leaving because of women. Lucien, a bit defensive, asks what she thinks of him, saying he's not some brute. Lavielle assures him that he's a gentleman, and thanks him for the shoes. She promises to wear them once she's feeling better. Lucien then tells her to rest and says he'll let her get some sleep. Lavielle reminds him that he left yesterday, after leaving the elixir. He says he didn't want to wake her while she was sleeping so soundly. Lavielle mentions that the Marquess won't be happy. Lucien says they can't change what happened, so they'll find another way to handle it. Lavielle then tells him that she won't need the elixir anymore, because she accidentally threw out the contents last night. Lucien tells her she did the right thing. Lavielle asks Lucien what he means by saying she did a good job throwing out the elixir. He explains that he's praising her because he was wondering when she'd get rid of it. He's read countless medical books and never seen such an absurd treatment. He's proud of her for making the choice to free herself from it. Now she can start untying herself from all the constraints. He asks if it was difficult when it came down to it. Lavielle wonders if Lucien knew she would do it from the start. He says he didn't know for sure, but he hoped she would make the choice on her own. She points out that he told her he couldn't disobey the Marquess's orders, which is why he took her with him. She doesn't understand why he's saying all this now. Lucien asks if she doesn't want to free herself from everything that binds her, from the shackles holding her back. Lavielle thinks to herself that ever since she arrived at the Meyer estate, her chances at happiness and freedom seemed lost. Sometimes she wonders if it would have been better to have died with her parents. She's been surviving, but just barely. Lavielle tells Lucien that her actions are none of his business. Lucien insists that it is his business. He doesn't want her to marry his father and become his stepmother. Lavielle challenges him, saying that he could be lying about being a Meyer. She questions why he's even there. Lucien replies that he feels like she has asked that question before, but in the end, the outsider in the Meyer family is her, not him. He's Lucien Meyer, but she's Lavielle Lewin. When Lavielle presses him about his motives, Lucien says he can't explain everything just yet, but assures her that she'll find out in time. Amon arrives back at the inn and calls for Rosie. She answers, surprised that he's back early, and asks if something happened. Amon inquires about how things are going at the inn. Rosie explains that they've had a few guests staying longer than usual, and one guest in particular seems odd. She tells him that this guest has been staying for a week without any room service. He hasn't touched his food or left his room at all. Amon asks if the guest has already paid, and if so, why is it a problem? He thinks Rosie is wasting her time worrying about something trivial. Rosie brings up the possibility that the guest might commit suicide, and the cleanup would be expensive. Amon starts to worry, thinking that the guest better not be dead. He asks Rosie for the guest's name, and she tells him it's Virgil Luo. Amon wonders what Virgil is doing there and realizes he should have known that Virgil is the innkeeper. In a flashback, Virgil is talking to Amon. Virgil says that he can't bear the thought of his wife passing away, and that nothing seems to be moving anymore. Amon replies that the Marquess is a busy man, and it will cost at least 500 kren for his services. Virgil explains that he's there to beg for money because he's in need. Amon agrees to lend him as much as he needs. Virgil calls Amon a crook and angrily asks why he didn't mention that the Marquess was out traveling. Virgil couldn't even see his wife before she died. Amon responds that he didn't know the Marquess was away on vacation. Virgil accuses him of lying, saying everyone knows he's close with the Marquess. He's upset that Amon would treat him this way after everything he's done for him. Amon tells him that this is a different matter. Virgil's wife is dead, but he still has a debt to pay. Amon says he'll give Virgil 1 week to pay up. If he can't, he'll sell Virgil's son in the slave market. If Virgil had borrowed only what he could afford, he wouldn't be in this situation, losing his wife and risking his son being sold. Rosie asks Amon if the guest is someone he knows. Amon tells her not to worry, saying the man doesn't have the guts to commit suicide. He then asks if there's anything else. Rosie says there isn't, but suddenly Amon stops his search and asks her what happened to his supplies. He accuses her of stealing while he was away. Rosie tries to explain, but Amon keeps accusing her. She insists she didn't steal anything, but Amon asks if she pawned them off. Rosie explains that one of the guests is a doctor and his wife was injured. Amon questions why she didn't tell him, or if she thought he wouldn't notice. Rosie says he came back suddenly, and she was busy with another report, so she didn't get a chance to explain. Amon, frustrated, asks if it's his fault and hits her. He then demands to know where the doctor is, and Rosie tells him the doctor is in the suite on the 2nd floor. Lucien knocks on the door, but there's no answer. He thinks to himself that it's odd, maybe she's asleep. He opens the door to let Lavielle know he's brought breakfast, but he finds the room empty. Lucien is searching for Lavielle when he spots the shoes he bought for her and remembers what she had told him. Just then, the door to the room opens, and Amon walks in. Amon greets him and introduces himself as the innkeeper. He explains that he was away and hadn't had a chance to introduce himself before. Lucien says hello in return. Amon mentions that he heard from Rosie that Lucien is a doctor, but that he must not be from around there. Lucien tells him that he's from Heil. Amon notes that Heil is quite far away and asks if Lucien is there for hunting. Lucien confirms that he is. Amon comments that the weather has been perfect lately. Lucien replies that he's a bit busy at the moment. Amon then asks if Lucien's wife is doing okay since he heard she's injured. Lucien explains that she fell off a horse. Amon says it sounds like a riding accident. Lucien replies that she's doing better now thanks to Rose's care. Amon asks if everything is okay, and Lucien confirms that it is. Amon offers his help with medicinal herbs, saying he knows where to get the best ones, and can give a discount if Lucien wants to buy in bulk. Lucien says he'll keep that in mind. As Lucien heads downstairs, Rosie calls out to him, asking if he has seen her boss. He just walks past her without answering. She asks where he's rushing off to, but he doesn't stop to explain. Lucien walks, thinking about his memories with Lavielle. He heads to the stable and sees Ally, his horse. He figures that since the horse is there, Lavielle shouldn't have gone far. He decides to look for her. Meanwhile, Lavielle is taking a walk. She is walking through the village. The weather is nice, and she thinks that if she takes it slow, her ankle won't hurt. She plans to walk a little more before heading back. She feels bad for not telling Lucien where she was going, but he's done similar things before, so she figures they are even now. Lucien can be unpredictable, but he's never tried to harm her. She wonders if he led her to where she is today, or if it's just her imagination. As she walks, she sees a woman selling hats. The woman says they have hats for every occasion and offers to recommend one that suits our girl. Lavielle hesitates and says she'll think about it and come back next time. The woman insists she should give it a try. Then, a child standing beside the woman says she's hungry. The woman tells the child that she's busy and that without sales, they can't afford any food. Lavielle notices this and asks how much the hats are. The woman shows her one for 5 crens and another for 8 crens. Lavielle decides to buy both hats. The woman is very grateful and thanks her. Lavielle tries on the hat and thinks it looks really nice. She decides to give the other hat to Rosie since Rosie looked extra pale and exhausted today. Lavielle hopes Rosie is okay. She'd really like to take Rosie back to the manor, but she knows she's not in a position to do that. As she walks, she hears some men talking. Klein asks if there's any news. The other reverend says they've purified the corrupted areas, but they haven't found the demon's den yet. The demons seem close, but they haven't shown themselves. Klein says they need to hurry, because it will be harder if the demons spread further. Lavielle thinks to herself that she really did hear them talking about demons. She thinks she must have misheard the priests. She didn't expect priests to visit such a remote place. Klein glances over at her. The other reverend asks if he was listening. He apologizes and says he thought he saw someone he recognized. He thinks to himself that even though blonde people are rare, Levrian being here is unexpected. Lavielle hears whispers from nearby farmers talking about their fields turning black, and they say it can't be pests. One of them mentions that the priests might have offended their blessings, but they are not sure. They say the year's harvest is ruined. Lavielle is surprised and thinks to herself that maybe the priests came to bless the land. That makes sense. As she walks, she bumps into Lucien. He greets her with a hello. Meanwhile, Rosie asks Amon if he's leaving already. Amon tells Rosie to get back to work and warns her that if she touches her herbs again, she's fired. Rosie says she needs more help at Eldon. She explains that it's impossible for her to handle the entire inn on her own, with all the cooking and cleaning. She doesn't even have time to eat. She asks if she can at least get a cleaner. Amon replies that she's been managing fine until now, so why should he change things? Rosie tells him that after 3 years of hard work, she's reached her limit. Amon says it's hard work, but that's how she earns her keep. Rosie explains that she's stretched too thin and can't handle it anymore. Amon says he gave her a place to stay out of pity and asks if she's forgotten her place or if she wants to go back to her bankrupt father or the brothel. He tells her she can't order him around and that he doesn't need her, so she should leave. Rosie apologizes, but Amon tells her she can go to the streets for all he cares. Rosie thinks to herself that she shouldn't have said anything. She has nowhere to go and hopes someone will help her. In the village, Lavielle asks Lucien how he found her. She wonders if she left a breadcrumb trail. Lucien says he was worried about her. She then asks what he would do if she confessed to something terrible, like killing people. Lucien says if it's her, he wouldn't complain. Lavielle tells him to stop joking around. Lucien explains that Amon still doesn't know she's there. He adds that his carriage is waiting outside, and it seems Amon only stopped briefly for some business. Lavielle asks what they'll do if Amon is at the inn. Lucien admits he's not sure, but they'll find out. She worries about going without a plan and running into Amon. Lucien says they'll head out, and he'll go back to check if Amon is still there. If he's gone, she'll be fine. Lavielle finds the situation strange. She says that if they run into Amon, it only makes things more troublesome for her, yet Lucien is helping her avoid that. Lucien agrees it will be a headache for him too. Lavielle asks if he was worried about her, and if he intentionally brought her out to help her. Lucien asks Lavielle if she's just figuring things out now. He says that at first, he only came to cause trouble for his father. He wanted to see fear in his eyes and nothing more. But then he saw her, and she looked like she had given up on everything. Lavielle thinks to herself that she had longed for death's release, and he seemed to read her perfectly. Lucien tells her he wanted to give her a chance. He explains that running away with Ally would be easy for him, but a young woman like her with nothing to her name wouldn't get far. If Maya wanted to, she'd be caught right away. So, Lucien only gave her a chance. If she takes Ally and escapes, he planned to tell his father that she had an accident and fell off a cliff. Lucien explains that Galatia is big and dangerous. Accidents happen, and bodies aren't easily found. Whether or not she starts a new life is up to her. Lavielle thanks him, and says she'll think it over while her ankle heals. Lucien says if that's what she wishes, she should stay with him until then. He adds that she shouldn't be on her feet for too long and asks about the hats. He wonders if she's going on another adventure. Lavielle says she bought one hat for herself and the other for Rosie. Unfortunately for him, there were only 2 hats. Lavielle and Lucien head back to the inn, and Rosie welcomes them. Lucien tells Lavielle that he assured her Amon would be gone. Lavielle says it's fine, she was just worried. She tells Rosie that she has something for her. She explains that she saw some hats on her walk and got one for Rosie, though she isn't sure if Rosie will like it. Rosie says she can't accept it, but Lavielle insists, saying she's noticed Rosie looking down lately and wanted to get her something. She admits it's not much. Rosie starts crying and thanks Lavielle. Lavielle asks her what's wrong. Rosie explains that Amon told her to leave, but she has nowhere to go. She was exhausted and needed help, but Amon called her useless and fired her. Lavielle is shocked and thinks to herself that Rosie has been running the inn by herself for a long time, and now she's being punished just for asking for help. Lavielle tells Rosie that if she's okay, they hear shouting. She asks where it's coming from. Rosie says it's Virgil Luo, and Lavielle realizes that's the guest who has been acting strange. Lucien says he senses trouble and plans to check it out. Rosie says she'll go too, since she's still working there. Lavielle says she'll go as well, but Lucien tells her she should rest her ankle. Rosie agrees and tells Lavielle to stay there. Lavielle says okay, but reminds them to be careful. Klein arrives at the inn and says he feels a dark energy coming from the place. He wonders why there is suddenly so much of it since, until now, the demon's presence was barely noticeable. The reverends walk in with him. One of them looks around and says the inn seems normal. Klein asks if there's anyone around. Lavielle steps forward and says she can help, but Klein mistakes her for someone named Levrian. Rosie and Lucien arrive at Virgil Luo's room. Rosie is worried and asks what they should do next. Lucien wants to be sure that it was really Virgil's voice she heard. Rosie thinks it was him, but she's not completely certain. She tells Lucien that Virgil hasn't left his room all day. Lucien asks if she has the room keys. Rosie says she does and hands them over. Lucien explains that they need to open the door quickly because Virgil might be having a medical emergency. Time is important, so they need to act fast. Rosie agrees and they unlock the door. Lucien calls out to see if anyone is inside, hoping that Virgil will respond. Klein arrives at the inn and notices that Lavielle looks very much like Levrian. He introduces himself and says he needs to ask her about a room. Lavielle apologizes and says she doesn't work at the inn. Klein asks if the innkeeper is around. Lavielle replies that she doesn't know him very well, but the caretaker is upstairs. Klein starts to explain more about what he needs, but his words are cut off by a loud scream. Klein realizes that the sound must be coming from upstairs, where the demon is likely hiding. He decides they need to act immediately and heads in that direction. Lavielle thinks to herself that the priests from earlier must be involved, but she's unsure what's happening upstairs. She sees Rosie and asks if everything is okay. Rosie responds that things are horrible. Just then, Virgil Luo comes out of the room, and Klein tells him to put down his weapon. Virgil says he can't do that. Klein warns him that this is his final chance to comply. Virgil warns Klein not to come any closer, or he might regret it. In a flashback, Virgil Luo is about to end his life. He says goodbye to his dead wife and son, then kicks the stool he's standing on. Just as he is about to fall, a stranger pushes him away. Virgil asks who the stranger is and what he's doing. The stranger tells him that it would be pitiful to die now, especially when Amon is still living well. Virgil asks how the stranger knows about Amon. The stranger says there's always a way to get revenge. Virgil says he can't stand the pain and feels that death is his only option. The stranger offers him a way to get revenge against Amon by giving him his master's blade. He tells Virgil to follow his instructions exactly. Virgil asks if the stranger is human. The stranger says he might be, or he might not be. Virgil says it doesn't matter if the person who taught him to use the blade is human or not, as long as it can curse Amon for eternity. Klein tells him that it's dangerous and begs him to put the weapon down slowly. Virgil tells him to be quiet. Klein thinks to himself that he's not getting through to Virgil and that things are looking bad. Lucien then steps forward, greets Virgil, and says it might be fate that they meet. He introduces himself to Virgil. Klein thinks to himself that Lucien must be out of his mind and warns him not to get too close to Virgil. He explains that the blade Virgil is holding is a demon blade, and if it's used, it will bring the demon back to life. They need to reseal it quickly before that can happen. Klein tries to convince Virgil to drop the weapon, but Virgil just tells him to shut up. He's determined to use this chance to get revenge on Amon. Virgil explains that once he stabs himself, the ritual will be complete, and the demon will be summoned. Klein argues that it's not really a ritual, but a curse meant to resurrect the demon. He says Virgil is just a pawn in a much bigger and dangerous plan. Virgil insists that it's fine if the demon comes back. He plans to use it to kill Amon, believing it's worth it since Amon caused so much suffering to his wife and son. Klein tries to reason with him, saying that they can help him if he just puts the blade down. But Virgil doesn't believe him and calls it nonsense. He's determined to make Amon suffer a never-ending nightmare, and is about to stab himself with the blade. Just then, Lucien steps in and stops Virgil from carrying out his plan. Klein orders the other reverends to take the dagger away from Virgil before it's too late. Despite their efforts, Virgil grabs the dagger and, in the struggle, cuts Lucien. Lucien collapses to the ground, fainting from the injury. Lavielle, seeing Lucien on the floor, desperately begs him to wake up. Klein explains that the demon is trying to take control of Lucien through the wound he received. To stop this, they need to seal the wound and start praying immediately. Lavielle is worried and tries to go into the room where Lucien is, but Klein stops her, saying it's too dangerous for her to go in. It's been 3 long days with no updates on Lucien's condition. Lavielle is feeling anxious and frustrated, wondering how much longer she will have to wait, and what's really happening with Lucien. She's growing increasingly worried. Rosie tries to comfort Lavielle. She tells her not to worry too much because the priests are working hard to seal the demon, and she believes that Lucien will be fine. Lavielle corrects her, saying that Lucien isn't actually her husband and that her name isn't Molly Hyacinth. Rosie looks confused and asks what she means. Lavielle explains that she can't go into all the details right now, but she and Lucien are not a real couple. She admits that she didn't like Lucien, he made her feel uneasy. She only pretended to be his wife, because she couldn't escape from the situation. Lavielle says she wishes she had left earlier, as maybe Lucien wouldn't have been hurt if she had managed to run away sooner. Rosie reassures her, saying it's not Lavielle's fault. She points out that it's really Virgil Luo who is to blame for trying to summon the demon. Rosie says that Lucien, or the man, is actually a hero for stopping the ritual. If he hadn't intervened, things would have been much worse. At that moment, they hear a voice from outside. A woman is complaining about whether anyone actually does their job around here. Rosie tells Lavielle that it's a new guest, but that it's a bit of a complicated situation. Rosie apologizes and says she'll be right back to handle it. Lavielle turns back to Reverend Klein and asks if Lucien is going to be okay. Klein tells her that, for now, they have managed to prevent the demon from taking over Lucien's body. However, because the wound is so serious, they will need to call in a doctor to take a look and provide further help. If you want to see what happens next, drop a comment, or give a thumbs up expressing your interest in a part 3. Your comments and likes helps determine if you're interested in really seeing the next part. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Until next time, ciao.